The highs, the lows, the underdogs, the overachievers, the poor performers, the bottle jobs. There's so much to talk about for this World Cup. Let's get straight into it. We're going to be ranking every single World Cup team's performance, and the first one of those teams is going to be Qatar. And for me, straight up 0 out of 10. They were just the worst hosts ever. No need to say anything else. They just had no quality whatsoever. Worst hosts of all time. Next team then is the Netherlands, and I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. They were decent, but a bit boring, although they did, once they got through the groups, they cruised past USA and did take Argentina 2 penalties, so were decent overall. Senegal then, 4 out of 10 for me. They were below what was expected, really, although that could have been because they didn't have Sadio Mane, and honestly, they were alright in the groups, but then they were crushed by England, so only 4 out of 10 for me. Now this might be a bit weird because they didn't get out of the group whereas Senegal did, but Ecuador, 5 out of 10, and this is because for me, most people did expect Senegal to go through even without Mane, and Ecuador definitely made it very, very difficult for them, and they were definitely good challengers, and arguably because of the football played and goals disallowed, deserved to go through instead of Senegal. So for me, Ecuador, 5 out of 10. They almost got out of the group when they really weren't expected to, and were way better than people expected. Next team then, on to Group B. England, for me, only a 6 out of 10. Like, we did play some very convincing football, some very good convincing football. However, we were expected to do better, and we were unfortunate to lose to France, but overall we should have really done a lot better than what we actually did, because we reached the final of the Euros, semi-finals of the World Cup before, and then only the quarter-finals, despite it being against a very good France team. But the problem was, it was a game where we really could have won. Next team then, Iran, for me, only a 3 out of 10. And I think that might be a bit harsh, because they were definitely better than what a lot of people expected. And other than against England, they were very solid, and they nearly got through the group, although they were pipped to it by the USA. But before I talk about the USA, next team, Wales, only 1 out of 10. Honestly, could have been 0 out of 10. They were just horrible this whole tournament, and honestly, I just don't think they were quite as bad as Qatar, so that's why they're 1 out of 10 instead of 0 out of 10. The only real spark they had was from Kiefer Moore, with their other good players like Ramsey and Bale really underperforming, so Wales, a horrific tournament from them. Next team then, I said I'd talk about them next. USA, 6 out of 10 for me. They did actually look, with that young team, pretty exciting, which is more than quite a few people expected. People thought England and Wales would go through. People didn't think USA had much of a chance unless they're from USA themselves. But the US, they managed to prove everyone wrong, really. Although once they did get to the round of 16, they were crushed by the Netherlands, despite Haji Wright scoring an obscene fluke of a goal. They were crushed by the Netherlands, and that's why it can't go any higher than a 6 out of 10, although people could argue that's probably being a bit too generous. Next team then, Argentina, 10 out of 10. I mean, they won. What more do you want? They won the World Cup. They're the best team at the World Cup officially. 10 out of 10. Next. Poland then, 4 out of 10. Boring. Poland games actually could have put anyone to sleep. It was ridiculous how awful they were. They were really only kept in the tournament by Szczesny, and that was the difference between them and Mexico in the end. So Mexico, only 2 out of 10. Although I said Szczesny was the only difference, with Poland playing as bad as they did, Mexico should have been expected to get out of that group, but they did not. They couldn't get out of the group. They were really poor against Saudi Arabia looked alright, to be fair, but they were really poor in the Poland game. Argentina, they had a lot of fire in the first half, but then second half quality ended up taking them away. And then Saudi Arabia had the amazing Chavez free kick. They did get another, they conceded late on to eliminate their chances of going through. And Mexico, with the way Poland played, definitely could have done a lot better this tournament. I think they would have been a really good team to have seen in the round of 16, but obviously they could not get there in the end. Next team then is Saudi Arabia, and you might think I'm crazy for this, but 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10 for Saudi Arabia, a team that didn't even get out of the group. I believe they finished bottom in the end, and this might sound mental, but Saudi Arabia, they weren't expected to do anything whatsoever, let alone beat the team that would end up going on to be the world champions in the first game of the tournament. They beat Lionel Messi's Argentina 2-1. First game, I mean, just winning a game was way more than anyone even expected, and for it to be against Argentina, future winners, what an achievement for Saudi Arabia. And to show how monumentous it was, they even got their own national holiday for that win. I mean, what more could you say? That's the only reason it's pushed so high. It honestly could have been like a 2-1, maybe even 0 out of 10 if they hadn't beaten Argentina or had lost, like it looked like it was going to happen until they turned it around. But for me, it might sound mental, Saudi Arabia, 7 out of 10. Next team then, we're on to Group D. France, 9 out of 10. If they'd won, obviously it would have been 10 out of 10. They were the finalists. They did have some shaky moments, but overall did look good enough. And honestly, it was mostly Mbappe. He was absolutely electric the whole tournament. What a player he is, and what a player he was for that whole tournament. Definitely carried France on his back, really, and probably the reason they got 9 out of 10 instead of maybe 7 or 6, because they weren't the most deserving finalists of all time, I'll say that. Next team then, Denmark. The only other 0 out of 10 I believe I've put in here. Denmark, 0 out of 10, because honestly, they were meant to be dark horses. They were expected to, some people, to even top France and win the group, but then they just went out and had this absolute stinker, finishing bottom of the group with both Tunisia and Australia, who are ranked so far below them. And honestly, Denmark, you expected so much better. They just had no attacking threat whatsoever, just nothing. They couldn't score, and they even looked shaky at the back. Christian Eriksen in midfield, you'd thought he'd play with some sort of vengeance after being ruled out of Euro 2020, but you didn't see anything from him. None of the Danish players really looked like showing anything that was deserving to play in the World Cup, really, and honestly, it was completely poor from them the whole time. So 0 out of 10 for Denmark. A horrible tournament for them, really. Next team then, Tunisia, 6 out of 10. They almost got out that group, which no one thought would they'd even get close, and honestly, they were tough to beat. They were solid, and they even beat France. It was a completely rotated team where Deschamps probably let his nan pick the team, but they still beat France, who ended up to be the finalists of the tournament, and that is a great achievement comparing the quality of the squads. Tunisia, they actually showed that they've got a bit about them, so fair play, 6 out of 10. Australia then, a high scorer here, 8 out of 10. What a group they had, and if it wasn't for Messi Ryan's one mistake against Argentina, it would have been 1-1, although Argentina probably would have scored, but it could have gone to extra time, could have gone to penalties. No one knows what would have happened. In the end, one mistake ended up separating them and the world champions. They were playing so well as a team. Aaron Moy, Suter, Royce, I think, something like that, the other centre-back, just like Rolls, I don't know. They all looked brilliant, they looked solid. I mean, their left back almost scored a Diego Maradona-esque goal against Argentina, which would have been ironic and an incredible World Cup moment. However, it was just about cut out in the end. But honestly, Australia, they can leave that tournament with their heads held high because they did their country proud. So overall, 8 out of 10 for me. Into the second half of the groups then. Japan, for me, they get a 7 out of 10 because their group stage was absolutely mental. It was ridiculous. They got out of the group of death featuring Spain and Germany, two of the powerhouses of national football, and they even took Croatia to penalties, who ended up being semi-finalists and eventually third place too. So they really, really were a very good team, very solid team, great unit, and they were clearly playing well and for each other. So Japan, 7 out of 10. Spain then, 5 out of 10. Now people might argue it should be higher because yes, they did win 7-0 in the group and did eventually go through without even topping the group and almost being replaced by Germany in the end. However, even though they won 7-0, their other games were completely bleh, and in the end they were bested by Morocco. So for me, only 5 out of 10. So it was a really poor tournament considering how well they started with the 7-0, obviously. Next team then is Germany, and I've gone all the way down to 2 out of 10, because from this group I remember predicting, I thought basically Germany and Spain would have been swapped, really, but Germany, they were just poor. They defended half alright, I guess, but then going forward they showed nothing whatsoever. Musiala, their only real threat. Obviously Folkrug got a goal that pretty much kept them in the tournament for as long as they were able to stay in against Spain, but other than that they just didn't show anything whatsoever, and for me, we're one of the letdowns of, well, they have to be one of the letdowns of the tournament, and like realistically they should have been getting out that group, but in the end a horrible performance led to them being knocked out. And now a team I'm ranking just higher than Germany, Costa Rica, I'm giving 3 out of 10, because surprisingly after Japan beat Germany, Costa Rica then beat Japan, which was very weird, but considering they put up a fight against Germany 4-2, they beat Japan. The only thing that stops them from going higher than a 3 out of 10 for such a small nation is the fact they lost 7-0, because that is an absolute embarrassment, and without that maybe they could have got themselves a 4 or 5 out of 10 considering they're such a small country. Anyway, Canada then, now they did finish bottom of their group, although I think that's very undeserving. However, I'm going to rank them 4 out of 10 because people might put them 2, 1, 0 because they were almost as statistically bad as Qatar, although in my opinion they were in a much harder group and played much better football. I mean, Canada, they were exciting, they looked decent, however I think in the end they really did just lack quality. Belgium then, a team that had loads of quality but just couldn't use it at all. They were so far off it. De Bruyne was probably right, they were too old, but they should not have been as bad as they were. 2 out of 10 for just a horrible tournament for Belgium's golden generation. However, that has gone completely down the toilet. Croatia then, 9 out of 10, semi-finalists yet again, and they also did way more than people expected. People like, well, they did well in 2018, but they're a bit old now. However, they proved people wrong. Luka Modric leading Croatia yet again, got them to 3rd place in the World Cup, a massive achievement for the country, and you remember how small their population is as well, so a massive achievement for Croatia and way more than anyone expected, so 9 out of 10. Morocco then, one of the teams of the tournament, semi-finalists, obviously ended up finishing 4th highest placed African team of all time, 10 out of 10. It was just so much more than expected. It was an absolute miracle. Well done, Morocco. Next team then, Brazil, only a 5 out of 10. These were people's favourites going into the tournament, might I remind you. But then they do decent enough in the group that they can play a reserve team against Cameroon. Still lost, still went through, didn't change it at all for Brazil. Then they go into the groups, demolish South Korea in the knockout. But then the next game, they just looked poor against Croatia. They didn't look poor, they had spells of the game where they were good, but Croatia had spells of the game where they were also completely dominating, and then Brazil lost on penalties in just the quarterfinals, and they were really expected to go so much further and could not, so only a 5 out of 10 despite them playing really good football at times. Next team then, Serbia, 1 out of 10, one of the lowest ranked teams in the video. They finished 4th in their group, not even winning a game, which was ridiculous considering there were so many people, dark horses. People thought they'd get out the group above Switzerland. Everyone thought Cameroon would be the worst team in that group, but in the end it was Serbia, who just looked really poor. They're basically just a bunch of thugs running around the pitch, just crunching people, and in the end they just lacked quality and just lacked being a good team, really. I mean, they just weren't good enough, that's all there is to it. Next team then is, of course, Switzerland, the team that got out the group with Brazil, and I'm giving them a 4 out of 10 because realistically they only scraped out of the group in the end, and then they got embarrassed 6-1 by Portugal, so overall not an impressive tournament from Switzerland. Cameroon then, my joint highest ranked team in this group, 5 out of 10, and it's because nothing was expected of them whatsoever. They were expected to do awful this tournament. However, in the end, they managed to put up a decent fight, beat Brazil despite it being a reserve team, which is still nothing to sniff at. And I do think that if Cameroon had gone through, then we would have seen a much more better performance against Portugal than we saw from Switzerland. And Abubakar for Cameroon also had some very good moments for him. So, considering what people expected of Cameroon, 5 out of 10 in the end, so they definitely did more than what was expected. Next team then, South Korea. And for me, they're getting a 6 out of 10 because they did escape the group, which was a massive achievement, but then they completely embarrassed themselves against Brazil, looking so open, so vulnerable, completely opposite of the good performances we saw from them in the group, and really let themselves down in that round of 16 match. So for me, 6 out of 10 is as high as it can go because in the end, they did let themselves down. Uruguay then, one of the other lowest ranked teams, 1 out of 10. They were dark horses, some people thought they might win. I remember Joe saying that he thought they might have won in the end, however that completely backfired. For me, only a 1 out of 10 because they just looked poor. They didn't look like they could score. They also looked vulnerable at the back, and one of the worst teams and letdowns of the tournament, really. Honestly, horrific for them. They were meant to be dark horses, but were boring, they were poor, they were sloppy, and in the end just were not dark horses whatsoever. Ghana then, 4 out of 10, the same as Canada. They look very good, very exciting, kind of lacked a bit of quality though, and I think they were unlucky to not go through the groups in the end, so they look pretty good. Next team then is Portugal, the final team of this video, and for me they get a 6 out of 10 because they were decent in the groups. They did enough to win the groups, so obviously they did alright, but then against Switzerland they demolished them, which would have given them a high ranking, but what moves them down from maybe a 7 or 8 was the fact that Morocco pretty much humiliated them. Portugal pretty much walked into the trap of how Morocco wanted to play, and in the end that led to Morocco knocking them out, and Portugal, in the end, for Ronaldo's probably last World Cup, having a really underwhelming performance. Anyway, that's this video. If you enjoyed, please remember to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments down below if you agree with any of these, any that you would change, any that you think I got completely wrong. I'm open to the criticism. I will not get everything right. Anyway, that's the end of this video, so I'll see you guys next time.